Hey folks, I'm Overdrive Senior Editor Todd Dills. Thanks for tuning in here for Overdrive's live panel discussion around the federal DataQ system. You've probably seen some of mine and Overdrive editorial director Max Haney's coverage of DataQs over the last couple of weeks running at overdriveonline.com. If you haven't and aren't particularly familiar with it, DataQs is the online hosted system through which both carriers and drivers alike can request reviews of data housed in the federal system about them. Chiefly, we're talking about inspections, violations, crashes, and other information associated with those roadside events. DataQs has been an important tool for all involved since the advent of the Compliance Safety Accountability Program, or CSA, back in 2010, when all of that information assumed a new kind of importance in the trucking business. Any violation marked on an inspection report, for instance, then became visible to the public and contributed to a newly adopted scoring methodology that was intended to be used by federal and state enforcement to prioritize investigatory efforts. Those with negative scores might be more often targeted for audits, for instance. That soon became increasingly more. That soon came increasingly in more focused areas. Those audits, where areas where the numbers suggest a particular safety issue there. Those scores being public initially, though, and today available through third-party recreators, marketing their services to carriers, insurance providers, and customers and others, that's all led to an increasing role in areas not just of safety and compliance, but also basic business, from insurance rates to the ability to contract with shippers and/or brokers. If you have a violation or a crash on your record that shouldn't be there, the way CSA is designed, thus, you're immediately feeling some effect from that violation. DataQs is the system you use to request a review of the matter, with those reviews rooted most often to the state jurisdiction that issued the violation or handled the crash. Drivers, owner-operators, and carriers have for years been frustrated by attempts to remedy what they see as an error when no supervisory or at least somewhat independent review is possible. Too often, many have reported, a conversation about a violation with the very officer who inspected the truck to begin with is the result. As one driver advocate said to me recently, when that happens for a trucker, sometimes it feels no better than arguing with an officer on the side of the road. Yet, there are best practices when it comes to DataQ's review requests, or DataQ's challenges, as many refer to the filings. We're going to be talking with two sharp minds today in that regard, and whether you're joining us on YouTube itself or our live stream via our live stream or at overdriveonline.com, I'd encourage you to post questions you have for both of our panelists in the comments section under each page. Overdrive's social media coordinator, Holly Young, is monitoring those and relaying them to me for the Q&A period that we'll have in the second half of this broadcast. We have today one panelist with a very strong background in law enforcement and another very strong on the trucking side. I'll start with the latter. So let me introduce here Christopher Haney, whose trucking background started a couple of decades ago when you were a driver and then an owner-operator, right, Chris?
That is correct. Yes.
Now you're with a fleet and you're overseeing safety and HR there. Tell us about what you do with Payne Trucking and how that work involves the DataQ system.
Well, Payne Trucking is a bulk carrier located in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and also in Maryland. We're one of the largest salt bulk carriers on the East Coast. My position here is the Director of Safety and Human Resources, and I handle pretty much everything that has to do with risk management, safety training, onboarding, human resources. I act as the corporate representative in all legal matters, going through mediations, court appearances, whatever it may be.
A lot of DataQs in there then.
And the DataQs. That is my responsibility. That is correct.
Payne runs about, I believe, has about 130 trucks last time we talked.
130, right? We also have a brokerage, which is a very large portion of the business.
And a fair amount of those 130 are owner-operators leased on too, right?
That is correct. We're probably about, I want to say almost 60-40 now.
Okay, 60-40.
But 40% being the owner-operator, 60% being asset.
Gotcha. Well, let's move on to introduce the second panelist today. He's directing various crash and inspection data programs with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. His name also happens to be Chris. So everybody forgive me for the sort of relative awkwardness of referring to these two gentlemen by their full names. So, Chris Turner, thanks for being willing to come aboard here and share what you know about the DataQ system. Tell us a bit about your background there with CVSA and the Kansas Highway Patrol, if you could.
Absolutely. First, thank you for having us on today. It's an important topic. We're excited. I'm certainly excited to talk about it. So my background, I began with the Kansas Highway Patrol in 1998. And when I came out of the academy, I already had gone through our truck inspection training. So I was certified as a level 3 inspector at that time, which is the driver walk around only, and later went on to NAS or CVSA level 1 and 2. So a full walk around, complete inspection of the truck, underneath the truck, the vehicle components, and the driver as well. And then hazmat certified, other bulk certified. Over time, eventually, my specialist changed a little bit. So I was involved with accident reconstruction and have been since 2002 as a drug recognition expert. And then I taught field sobriety for the Kansas Highway Patrol. So that was kind of my background when I came into what was our Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program. And that's the grant that FMCSA gives to the states to inspect trucks. And then eventually I became a lieutenant and began working DataQs in 2006 and worked them through my retirement in 2021 now, I guess, in February. So I worked with thousands of DataQs over that time. I worked with a lot of officers and carriers to really determine the factual outcome of the DataQ.
That's interesting that you mentioned that you began working with the DataQs in 2006. That must have been it must have been a little bit different then before CSA happened in 2010, I would imagine. Eh?
Yeah, the Wayback Machine. So it was completely different. You know, when I first came on, we had, I might have 3 DataQs in my queue over the course of a month to work. It was a very different system when it was based on the SMS methodology and compliance reviews only, which are now called investigations.
Right.
But once they went to CSA, way back when we called it CSA 2010, as it was coming out, we were part of that development team with FMCSA, CVSA was. And through that, Kansas was a pilot, one of the pilot states. So we had 50% of our investigations were the old school and 50% were the CSA investigations. You had states like Colorado who were 100% CSA. So many changes over time since the original DataQs when I started working them.
Yeah. And a lot more DataQs too.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, substantially more, a lot more.
It just means a lot more at this point, I think, is the deal, right? So a lot of folks in the audience knows that what CVSA is, and it's comprised of not only law enforcement representatives from federal, state, and provincial jurisdictions, but also a large number of associate members. I think that's the terminology for representatives from trucking itself. And you guys meet regularly, year in, year out, and it's kind of aimed at harmonizing inspection standards and plenty more. I was just wondering, Chris, you're past president of CVSA. I'm correct, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. From your perspective, when you're thinking back over time at CVSA meetings and things, what have been the chief issues discussed around DataQs over the many years that you've been involved? How often has it been a topic of debate in the association, and kind of what chiefly are the issues from the enforcement and carrier sides as you've understood them up to the present?
Yeah, so CVSA stands for the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, and our goal is really uniformity and consistency across all of North America. Our jurisdictional members include provinces and territories in Canada, the U.S., all the states, territories, and D.C., and then Mexico as a country is also a member, and that's our chief concern. Our jurisdictional members, us as an alliance, believe first and foremost in consistency. That's done through training, education, outreach, making sure the out of service criteria matches the federal regulations, and then making sure that our members have that information, because we want to prevent, our whole goal is to prevent crashes. It isn't to collect data for any other reason. We want to know that if there's a crash and there was a reason for that crash, what can we do to mitigate that in the future to save lives? And along with saving lives is our number one priority. 1A that is just immediately underneath that is making sure we facilitate the best atmosphere that we can for motor carriers and drivers to be safe, and to make sure that their goods and products and services get where they need to go with the most ease as possible, and that they're safe too. I mean, whether it's any kind of crash, it's tragic for all of the people involved, and it's tremendous burden on the motor carrier as well. And we realize that. So first of all, I want to make sure I talked a little bit about that. As far as the DataQs,
Sure.
those are a conversation that come up at every single CVSA meeting. We have in between our meetings, our committees regularly get together and visit as well about things that come up throughout the year. And then we also sponsor our CVSA data quality training in conjunction with FMCSA, and that's every 18 months. And it just happens to be next week. So that's for law enforcement only at that point. And what we really strive is to make sure that those folks who come into the DataQ system really receive the training. They understand how to work with the data, submit it correctly to FMCSA, but also we have a pretty good section on our policy side, training folks who work those DataQs. And our goal is to make sure they do it, consistently and accurately over time, so we have the best product available. But whether it's DataQ adjudication topics that CVSA worked with FMCSA on, and I was part of that panel also a while ago now, or CSA, the landscape has changed so dramatically, and law enforcement, one, as you mentioned earlier on, has seen such a dramatic increase in DataQs. It really puts a lot of burden on the states, and it's important from their point of view that when they receive a DataQ, that it's concise, that it states that what the carrier wants is relief, what the driver or the carrier believes the officer was mistaken about, or had a lack of a communication about roadside, and we want to make sure that that's cleared up. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but one of the other concerns is the adjudicated citations and making sure that those are handled appropriately when they do reach the DataQ analyst.
Okay. Just generally speaking, do you think that over time, since the advent of the CSA program, I've heard this from carriers, I've heard this from law enforcement, there is a sense out there that processes for handling DataQs has improved a bit over time. And I was just wondering if you feel like, what you feel that's attributable to. Is it like just people getting more familiar with it over time and getting educated about it and figuring out how to use it, basically?
Yeah, I do. So first, I want to give a lot of accolades to Chris and Payne Trucking. So Chris and associate members in CVSA, drivers, carriers, different associations have really helped us strive to be better at the job that we do. But they've also gotten better about how they input the DataQs. Two major changes that have improved over time are, one, the DataQ adjudicated citation policy from FMCSA. I think that ensured that states would adequately address any finding of not guilty, whether it's a finding of law or fact by a judge or jury after the court system, that was appropriately handled in the DataQ system. So if a judge or jury, as a matter of law or fact, finds you not guilty, or that the law didn't apply in this circumstance, that should come off. And so that's been a great change for carriers. But there are some challenges with it that I know we're going to talk about. And then also the crash preventability, what was a demonstration program and is now a determination program. If motor carriers now have the opportunity to have a crash removed from their profile based upon the evidence in the police accident report and other facts that they can put forward, that's a huge success and a huge improvement. It used to be the only time you could get those off your profile was if you had an investigation or a compliance review. And then the carrier had to write a letter to the division administrator of the state. That division administrator of the state would usually call the police folks, because they didn't know a lot about crashes. That's just not their specific training. And it was a system that needed improvement. And FMCSA's crash determination program, I think, is a tremendous step in the right direction to give carriers an avenue to remove those crashes. There have been a lot of improvements, and I'm really thrilled about them.
Yeah, that is that how it works? If it's deemed not preventable, the crash disappears from the record, or is it labeled as such? I can't remember.
Yeah, so it doesn't completely disappear from the record, and to be clear and precise about exactly what happens when the carrier does that, and if it's a finding of non-preventability, it does show that it happened, because it did happen.
Right.
But then it's removed from the SMS methodology, so the safety management system, and it no longer changes the carrier score or impacts the carrier score negatively. And then also on the driver's PSP report, it's shown that yes, there was a crash, but underneath it will have language indicating that it was non-preventable, to make sure folks who are looking to maybe hire this driver in the future know that it wasn't their fault.
Yep. And Chris Haney, have you had occasion to use that crash preventability determination program since it went live? I think it was it's only been permanent, I guess, since last year. I think it was about this time when it happened.
I just started my first preventability, and I've been waiting now for 7 weeks, I think.
Okay.
Which is just taking a very long time. So I can't tell you whether or not it's going to be successful because I have not had an opportunity. I do have reservations. If it were to come back as non-preventable, it identifies it as being or preventable. It's the consequences of that are still yet to be seen on my side. I've heard stories. There are issues with that because if it's not being adjudicated, it's just being reviewed. And if it comes back as not being listed as a non-preventable, then it's preventable, then we're at fault, driver's at fault, everybody's at fault. And it just creates an issue, which is one of the main things that I'm so vocal on, and that's the unintended consequences of the program. I believe 100% in CSA. I believe in the program. I believe that there needs to be a system. I believe that there are bad actors out there. The issue that I and many of my colleagues have is, again, it's the unintended consequences of this. The information is public and it's available to people and parties that don't understand what it is. They take it at face value. And that creates a huge problem for us. So yay to the system, but we're not happy about it being public prior to any opportunity to be able to challenge the information. And I know we're going to talk more about that as we get going, but
yeah,
that's just one of the big things. Chris, your explanation, the way you present it fabulous. And if that is the way that it was perceived by the public and all the relative parties, this would be a non-issue.
Right.
But it's not.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, Chris, I think you make a great point, and CVSA and industry both asked that portions of CSA not be public facing anymore, for example, crash. And it is not for just exactly part of that reason. But I think Chris makes a good point. We're going to have to see what those unintended consequences are, to Chris's point, and really make adjustments in the future. The goal is to give carriers that avenue, but I'm sure there will be problems and we'll have to address them.
Yeah, and the issue in particular with the crash preventability determination is like, yes, if your crash is deemed preventable, it's going to say preventable under it. And preventable and this crash is my fault are not really the same thing, but
they're not the same thing at all.
No, they can be construed to be that, right? And we're just wondering, like, is that going to just gum up the works even more when it comes to trial lawyers?
Something that's you mentioned that I'm also a lawyer too, but and so I can, as you're saying that, think of all the ways to attack different situations. But one of the things that I think over time we are seeing is that folks are understanding that a crash isn't just this happened and therefore somebody was speeding and the crash happened. It's not that simple. There's factors, just exactly like you talked about. There's mitigating and aggravating factors, and there's nothing. It is hard to find a crash and just absolutely say, but for this particular incident, 3 miles an hour over the limit, whatever it is, this crash wouldn't have happened. That's really hard to say. And so trying to take those factors into consideration is really important.
Right.
Yeah, a not at fault accident can still be considered a preventable accident. And this is an argument we have often from a safety perspective, is trying to communicate that message. One of the issues that I've got with the crash report is there's detailed information. To make sure everybody understands, and this is one of the biggest arguments from our industry on the crash side of this, is okay, it's not private. It's still there. Anyone can go in and click on a button and pull up a crash, and they can see the report. And on the report, and here's where one of my biggest peeves is it indicates whether a driver has been cited or not. It doesn't say what the citation is for. It doesn't say anything other than yes or not determined or no. And when it says yes on the crash report, it doesn't show up on the unsafe driving CSA. There's no opportunity to challenge that. But if a driver gets involved in a crash that doesn't involve a roadside inspection and he gets a citation on site, well, that ticket can be adjudicated. And we can go in, we can fight it, we try it, the guy, and we can get out, but it doesn't, the yes on the crash report isn't removed.
Yeah, that's not something that you can. That's not one that you can do through the DataQs process. Which is
so
what we're talking
when
today,
when we talk about this from a government level through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and we say, look, we need to have this removed if the driver is not. We say, well, no, we understand it. This isn't saying that he was convicted. This is just saying that he received a citation at the scene.
Right.
Okay, well, and we understand and know what that means, but my insurance company doesn't, the plaintiff's attorney doesn't, the general public doesn't, the customer doesn't. All they see is driver was cited, no explanation, nothing else. And you can say, well, fine. They'll reach out and they'll say, well, listen, you got a crash on your report. We'd like an explanation. Well, that's fine. And I can write a letter and we can explain the circumstances and that we took this to court and it was adjudicated. The driver was found not guilty and no issue. So that's all fine and dandy, except what about the customers I'm losing that see it, that don't reach out for an explanation and just say, right, oh, no, I don't even want to deal with these guys, without even giving us an opportunity. Right. We have been tried and convicted without even an opportunity to voice an objection or offer our opinion. And these are huge problems. When this is made public, then you're inviting a wide variety of interpretations. I come from a world where perception is just as damning as facts. Mm-hmm. And I have no chance to argue any of this if I'm never given an opportunity. And that's why I have such a problem. And many in the industry, such as myself, have such a problem with this. You know, to say it's private, but it's not private. It is public. And the part that's public is you have no opportunity to explain it. Right. So
how do we mitigate against that using DataQs if it's a possibility? I guess I was wondering in other situations, not the crash quandary that we're talking about. We've been talking about up to this point. I was Chris. I was wondering if you might walk us through a DataQs challenge that may have been a little more challenging than most, and kind of give us give us a kind of a narrative of how you kind of got through it and the challenges that you experienced. And along the way, maybe are there ways to speed up the process? What are the best practices to kind of mitigate against the fact that, yes, when you if you have a violation that is unwarranted, it's going to sit there until it is removed. And that's going to take time, but how do we speed that up, I guess?
Yeah, so as far as challenging DataQs go, and that kind of goes back to the DataQ adjudication, I can think back to a couple really specific ones I had, and it wasn't long after the DataQ adjudicated citation policy went into effect. And first of all, I want to be really clear in this statement that the majority, the lion's share, nearly all carriers out there and drivers are trying to do the right thing. These are true professionals. I think this past year highlighted how professional these carriers and drivers are, how integral they are to our everyday lives. So I would be remiss if I didn't thank them on this podcast, the carriers and drivers and all those folks. And when I tell this story, You are not who I'm speaking to. I want to be absolutely clear. So who I am speaking to, though, is folks who do, we have to plan for the worst, right? So as an example, we stopped a driver in Kansas several years ago, and that driver had his third open beer that he had drank. He had his grocery bag on the side of his chair. That's where he was dumping his empties, and he had the rest of the 30 pack in the back of the truck. I don't specifically remember the court circumstance that led to, I believe it was for some reason it was pled down, or maybe the officer wasn't able to show up. I mean, obviously the court and the prosecutor still have prosecutorial discretion. But at any event, it became a challenge to figure out how to work that when we had the video evidence, the driver's, confession. It's all right there. It's a matter of fact, it happened. We know that it happened. And this is someone that I think Chris and all of those other carriers that I talked about, this is not a driver you want behind the wheel of your truck. Nobody wants this anywhere. So in that circumstance, we just had to figure out how that worked within the DataQ adjudicated citation. And ultimately in that situation, we didn't remove that particular one. And that's one of those things we still need to work out when we talk about, and Chris mentioned it before, unintended consequences, right? So, we didn't necessarily envision a court for a reason other than, finding him not guilty per se, coming back. And now we have to remove one where we absolutely know as a matter of fact that this happened. And you walk up and the officer's there and he's drinking the beer. So, there's not a lot getting around that. So, that's a story that created a unique challenge. And I've got a couple of those. I had a hazmat carrier driver who's driving a load of hazmat, and it was his third DUI. And he was operating hazardous materials vehicles. Now, these are, again, the worst case outlying way outside of our average normal situation. But they are some of the weird ones that happen out there. So, but to your point about the best practices, there are a lot of things carriers can really do to help themselves. First, CVSA and FMCSA need to continue to talk about the importance of DataQs. We need to continue to train folks and DataQ managers to make sure they understand how to use the system. That's critical. But carriers can help themselves a couple different ways. You mentioned it early on. When they file a DataQ, it can feel like they were arguing with the officers on the roadside, and that should not happen. And so I'll just start with, what happens at the roadside. A driver should feel comfortable not arguing with a law enforcement officer. That's what court's for and lawyers are for. But there's no reason that, and I would encourage drivers to ask the officer, hey, can you show me what you're talking about? Just saying, hey, I want to do this right. I'm attempting to do it right. Can you point out to me the violation? Can you show it to me, or can you explain it to me? I had many officers or drivers ask me that roadside, and I'd go and print out the federal regulation. We'd talk about it. We'd look through it. Now, not always is someone able to do that. Maybe you're not in a safe location. Maybe that's something that not every officer feels at the time that it's safe to do, especially during COVID. I can't bring somebody back to my car and go over it with them in a safe location. But that's a good start. Just have a conversation, a respectful conversation with the officer. Go ahead and document the violation that they're showing with the camera. Just hop out and say, hey, is it all right if I take a picture of this for my boss or for our records, whatever it is, and try and get the officer or the car in the picture. So there's not a way that if I'm working the DataQ, I can say, well, that's now back at your shop, that's the picture you're showing me, but that's not what happened at the scene, because you've taken a picture of what was at the scene. So that's another way that you can help yourself. So there are a lot of those best practices when you file the DataQ itself, making sure that you're concise, that you're to the point, that you have that supporting evidence and information. And then where you can, if you can reach out via phone call or put in the DataQ, hey, I'd like to visit with whoever's working this to talk a little bit more in depth about it, so you can really express where you're coming from. Right. It's not a situation where I'd recommend any kind of, combative attitude at all. The more you can come at with the approach of, hey, I don't want to be held accountable for something that isn't accurate. But if it is, we'll move on and I'll DataQ the next one. I think a lot of folks would be pleased with the response that they get either at the roadside or from the DataQ analyst. And then lastly, I would just say that if you have a result and you firmly believe you're right, which is why you challenged it in the first place, ask for that appeal, hit that button again, reply and say, I appreciate the time you put into this DataQ. However, I still feel we are right for these reasons. May I have a second review? And you'll find that you have a lot of success when you try and do that.
Right. Yeah, Chris Haney, I wanted to mention here. I totally forgot to do this in the intro, but one of the reasons we wanted to have you on here is because you've got a so far anyway, knock on wood, perfect perfect DataQs record, meaning everything that you've challenged or requested a review of has resulted in the change that you wanted. So you're doing pretty well. Walk us take us through a similar scenario if you could, and walk us through one that gave you a little trouble, and tell us how you resolved it, and leading toward a similar kind of best practices discussion from the carrier side.
All right. So one in particular that I'm particularly proud of, and it involves a driver was coming up to an intersection, has a slight curve in it, slight left curve in it. And my driver was making up to an intersection, and my driver was going to make a left turn. So he was in that left lane. And another driver, this was just in an automobile, and she was in the right lane, and she was going to be going straight. So both vehicles come around that curve and they impact. And the driver of the automobile got out of the car, screaming, yelling, hollering, whole 9 yards, pointing a finger at our driver. And it turned into a big deal. So police were called, police came out, 2 units came to the scene, and they went through their investigation process, and they cited my driver for, I think it was failing to maintain the lane or something along those lines. And the vehicle, the car was towed away. Well, car was towed away at the request of the other vehicle's driver. She just simply didn't want to drive the vehicle. So this turned into a reportable accident, showed up on our CSA, and the driver got his ticket and he got his court date, and we happen to have dashcam video. So let me start by saying, first best practice, dashcam video. Everybody out there, if you have a truck or a bunch of trucks, get dashcam videos. I cannot tell you, they will pay for themselves over and over and over again. So with that said, I happen to have a dashcam video that showed this driver alongside our driver for about maybe 150 feet prior to getting to the intersection. Follows us all the way up. I was able to blow the video up. You could see the woman's left hand come to the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel and go to 9 o'clock, making a left turn, turning the vehicle into our vehicle.
Wow.
So blew up the video, got it all set up for the driver, took stills, had the whole thing all set up. Driver took it into court. The woman showed up. Played the video. She screaming and hollering in the courtroom. But anyway, showed the video to the judge, and the judge saw the hand go up on the wheel and turn the wheel into our vehicle, and just right then and there said, not guilty. And that was it. And the woman just went nuts, screaming and hollering, so much so that the judge had to get up and walk out of the courtroom. It was incredible. So where I'm going with this was, not only did the video help the driver get out of the citation, but I also used the video, the dashcam video, to challenge the reportable accident. And by doing so, the only reason that it was a reportable accident was because the vehicle was inoperable at the scene, which classified it as a reportable accident. So when I did the DataQ, I was able to use the video to show, which it just so happens the position of the video captured the officer at the scene getting into the woman's car driving the car through the intersection, around the corner for another maybe 15, 20 feet to where the tow truck was. And it didn't take a whole lot more than that to get the crash reversed and get it removed. And it's the little things like that that just get really frustrating. But the problem we had was it sat on that report for a long, and of course, after the driver went and got the not guilty, we submitted all that information as well, so that we could support that, that our driver was not in fault in any of this either, and it worked well, and
right.
we had it all removed. So that's one way, that just using video, keeping it simple, sticking straight to the definition of a reportable accident, using the language. We didn't include our opinion. I didn't say anything about how, just cut and dry.
Right.
Definition of a reportable accident. Here's the evidence of the vehicle being removed from the scene under its own power. And that's pretty much all it takes. We didn't add a whole lot of else to it. And that we were successful in that one.
And that citation, I'm assuming there's probably a violation associated with that on the driver's record, was also able to be removed because
but not on it doesn't show up on CSA.
Yeah.
Because there was no vehicle inspection as a result.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, because
So
it's
completely
non-reportable. Yeah, but they're two different things. That's not non-preventable. That's just not reportable.
Yeah.
So
Not
it doesn't even go into the database. That's an extreme example, and we both brought those, but that is fantastic advice.
And it's
Both of our examples
Dashcam.
were, but that's great. That's fantastic. That's exactly how you're supposed to do it.
And if there's time, there's another one that I would love to have an opportunity to explain.
I wanted to address that issue that you brought up, Chris, because that is a question that we've gotten in from readers in recent times about how to speed up that the lag time between all of that. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but because like you said, this crash happened. It was immediate. I mean, not immediately, but very soon it shows up on the record. Like how much time elapsed between the crash and you guys being able to successfully DataQ it? It's probably, I'm guessing, months.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. I mean, how do you like how do we deal with that? Is it all speed getting to the evidence, I guess? In a case that a lot of our readers have, is that they'll receive a citation. Let's just say it's speeding, and with the idea that they'll take it to court and challenge it, and if they are successful there, they'll take it and they'll DataQ it and get it off the record there. There's a lot of time involved there. How do we speed that up if it's at all possible? Do you, instead of going out and relying on the court to throw it out, or do you DataQ it before you take it to court? I'm thinking from the point of view of an independent owner operator, say, or a very small carrier. Yeah.
So even the court system, you're looking at lengthy time frame before you get that done. So I would say to DataQ it as quickly as you can. So there's some built-in time delays, I suppose, that are going to be frustrating. So most states have a 10-day requirement to get the basically first draft, I'll call it, of an accident report in. That means basically your cover page, the critical information, and that's a requirement as part of federal highway dollars to make sure those are uploaded to NHTSA through one of the federal crash databases. FARS is what it's called, the Federal Accident Reporting System. So there's a built-in delay there. And then you have even a delay between 30 and sometimes 60 days once we've made a change, if a change is made before it even is removed from the carrier's profile. And it's actually removed in MCMS immediately, but each of those FMCSA systems take snapshots or pull their data over time. So to speed it up, the first thing I would do is file that DataQ. So as quickly as you can, request a copy of an accident report if it's a crash, or your driver should make sure they keep a copy of that inspection report that they were given roadside. If not, request one immediately. Immediately hop on as quick as you can to file that DataQ. And I know these are things that they're burdens upon the carrier, right? And burdens upon the driver. But as we're talking about a faster way to get it off the profile, that's the way to do it. You just have to take the time to make sure you submit it as quickly as possible. And I like Chris's example, stayed with the facts, stayed with the regulation, said why they believe that it didn't happen or wasn't accurate per the regulation, and were concise, and gave an offer. Again, my recommendation is always to give an offer to visit where you can with the person, because so much gets lost in email communication and typing, and actually when you get a chance to talk to somebody, if Chris called me, I bet we'd have a 5-minute conversation getting to know each other, and then understanding where we're coming from, and whether it's resolved in his favor or not. That does something for future RDR requests for data reviews. So these are not isolated incidents, but over time, you want to build these relationships where it's membership to CVSA and you can meet different enforcement officials, or, if you're a smaller operator and you don't have that opportunity, taking time to visit with the officer roadside. So much of this is also about relationships over time. As part of let me tell you something not to do. So as an example, we had a lawyer who would file on behalf of a lot of carriers, but would just early on when this came out, it was throwing spaghetti at the wall, so to speak, to seeing what would stick. That's not okay. So law enforcement's frustration when you file things that aren't right, but you just don't like it, that's not going to go well. And that's going to degrade your relationship over time. So when you do file a legitimate DataQ, then, human nature, right or wrong, is going to be looking at that with skepticism. And we shouldn't. We should all be professionals, but humans are humans. So you want to make sure that you file those good DataQs, that you have that opportunity to build those relationships over time. And that's going to get them done faster too. They'll see that name pop up or that carrier pop up. And the first thing, again, human nature is, this person files legitimate DataQs. Let's pop this one up because we can probably knock it out quick, as opposed to one that's going to take me longer to work in the DataQ system. I'll start by saying, or end by saying, there's between 3 and 4 million inspections every year. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of violations that occur every year. In the RDR system, I'm trying to think back to your article, and you probably know the number better off the top of your head than I do, but we're 60,000-ish.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so the percent's not high, and carriers have done a much better job of challenging them. Law enforcement's done a better job of working them, but to Chris's, from his point of view and ours, they need to be worked faster. To make sure that folks get the resolution that they deserve. This matters to them and their families.
Yeah, I just want to bust in here and say, I meant to do this earlier, but remind everybody, if you've got a question, anybody out there in the audience, pop it down there in the comments under the YouTube stream, or the post on Overdrive where it's housed, and Holly will get them over to us. Improvement, Chris Turner, you had just mentioned that. You and I had talked about, and Max Haney and I wrote about the efforts that have sort of been ongoing to sort of test the idea of a kind of national approach to appeals. But before we get into a little bit more of that, I wanted to ask Chris Haney, have you gotten to a place with a lot of DataQs where you've had to file an official appeal? And if so, like how have you gotten through those?
No.
Okay.
No.
You haven't.
And I know, and Todd, I have to laugh because when we were going through the interview and you had asked me about my success record, and I had so innocently and wasn't even thinking about it. And I said that I had a perfect record, which I do, but now that it's out there, I feel like I just whomped myself.
Yeah. You're cursed now.
So, I know, but no, I have been fortunate. Okay. All of those that I have done, I have not had to appeal. So all I can offer are stories from colleagues. Right. And frustration generally, and usually after they explain what the issues were, it's pretty recognizable that during the appeal process, they were more interested in expressing their feelings about it than they were about arguing whatever their actual
Arguing the actual case. Yeah. Yeah. I've
So
heard that from a
less
lot of folks.
feelings,
Yeah.
less feelings, and stick to those facts.
Right. We've got what we mean by when I say appeals, just to clarify, we're talking about you submit a DataQ, you're asking
Right.
for a violation to be removed, and the state comes back with a final decision, and then you, like Chris Turner said earlier, you hit that reply again, and you ask for either a supervisory review or somebody in the training department to take another look. And in some cases, the state of Minnesota, as any of our regular readers may know from our coverage of this in that Setting the Record Straight series, in some cases, there are panels that do involve industry folks that are tasked with reviewing the really hard to handle DataQs cases where there's a question there that just can't be resolved to the satisfaction of the carrier or driver, as the case may be, and requires a more in-depth review. And Chris Turner, tell us a little bit about the effort that CVSA is undertaking to kind of test out and to take that sort of appeals panel idea and take it to a larger scale on a national basis.
Absolutely. So, I was going to use a different example, but this will work. So behind me, you see the law books up there. So those aren't the federal regulations, but they might as well be. So, we're talking about books that are pretty thick, the font's small, and there's a lot of pages. And none of us, no matter how good we are, can be absolute experts on every part of the federal motor carrier safety regulations. It just can't do it. So CVSA, and first of all, FMCSA recognized that there are improvements to be made in the DataQ system. And as part of their high priority notice of funding opportunities, they asked for innovative ideas that may help with DataQs, requests for data review, or a DataQ appeals process on a national level. So CVSA last year proposed a different appeals process to FMCSA. We weren't awarded the opportunity to move forward, but what we were awarded from FMCSA was the opportunity to flesh that out more, to explore that, to have some meetings. Let's see where we're at. So CVSA in this next round of high priority grants from FMCSA is going to try again. And our goal is to establish a panel at a national level. And we'll start with the demonstration project to make sure we do our best to get the kinks worked out and try and avoid unforeseen consequences with 2 or 3 member states. And the idea is that as they have those carrier appeals, that not the first appeal, because that would go back to the state, to hopefully a management level where the state could take another look at it from the carrier's point of view and decide. And if there's still yet another appeal, so your second appeal or basically your third challenge, it would come to CVSA through the DataQ system. That require FMCSA to make some changes in the system, because one of the things we don't know is exactly how many are appealed. We do know.
Right.
Because it's just a reply on an email button,
Yep.
right? So we need to change a little functionality in the system. FMCSA has at least been open to that idea. Hopefully we wrote a good enough grant that they believe in what we're trying to do. And we want to incorporate law enforcement. So our idea right now is a 7-person panel. That would be 4 law enforcement officers, carrier, and then 3 from industry is right now what we're talking about. And that would include a driver, a carrier representative, whether it's members of our association, a group of associates, or ATA or OIDA, who that is yet to be determined. But it's critical we have that carrier point of view, that we have someone like Chris who says, okay, hey, this is where the carrier is coming from. This is what they're seeing. This is what they're looking at. And then as necessary, we'll bring in subject matter experts. If it is one of those harder parts of the federal regulations, whether it's hazardous materials and a labeling requirement on a battery that requires the package to be marked, but it doesn't have to be placarded on the truck, one of those harder type of situations. And then they'll vet it. That group will make a decision and provide a recommendation back to the state. And then the agreement with those participating states is that they will change it based on this panel's recommendation about how that should go. So it'll be a little bit more time consuming once we're fleshed out, meaning that we'll have to have that second appeal. So going back to the best practices for the carrier, if you get denied, I believe you're right, you'll want to appeal quickly, to help resolve that process. And then once it does get to us, we'll take that look at it and provide that best recommendation back to the state. We're excited about the opportunity. We know this has been longstanding. Reading your article, industry out there says it's time to do something different. And a national DataQs panel is had greater than 50%. I think there's a lot of support out there for it, and we want to see if we can really make a difference. And again, get to the corrected data. That's what we want. Not about who's right or wrong, other than the fact, was the violation present? And if so, let's cite it and see if ways we can prevent crashes in the future.
Chris Haney, do you feel like that sort of idea is something that would materially improve the DataQs system?
Anything that more involves industry and industry representatives, drivers, the trucking company representatives, yes, I think that would go a long way towards developing that relationship, so that there's a little bit more trust if we can say that we have some input involved in this. Because right now, as an industry, we just feel more like a victim of the process rather than a part of the process. And we've talked about this before. We touched on it a little bit in the beginning about what the perception is. There are bad actors out there. Yes, there are, but it is such a small percentage of drivers and carriers, but yet we're all judged as an industry on the actions of those few. And actually, that works both ways. It's just frustrating on our part that we don't feel like we have involvement. So yes, anything that involves a panel that includes industry representatives that are actually participating and contributing, not just a figurehead or just somebody to put on a bumper sticker.
And to Chris's point, these are not to be figureheads or token industry or driver members. These are meant to be individuals, and they'll have to apply. They'll be vetted. We want them to have training and experience and years behind them. And it's just like at CVSA meetings, so we have a large group of associates because, even my first CVSA meeting, a pentile hook, I didn't come from a background, as a kid where I would know what that component was, or if I break apart a brake chamber, that the spring is under however many thousands of pounds of pressure, or that, how a brake drum and a braking pad may influence the push rod travel length of the braking system and making that out of adjustment. We need, cops are cops, drivers are drivers. We need those industry experts, whether it's carriers or manufacturers or the folks who write the VMSS for the standards for vehicles to be made to. We have to have that expertise working cooperatively. So there's no intent for it to be a figurehead situation. We need that input. It is valuable and it's critical. At the same time, we also want to make sure that it's independent, right? So one of the things you started off talking about, and I mentioned it twice, and I'm sure Chris would agree, you don't want it going back to the officer per se. Now, the agency is going to have to reach out to the officer to get their video, to get their notes, to compare stuff. That's natural, that's normal, just like the carrier does with their driver. But you want that to be really an independent look, and that's the goal of what we're doing with the DataQs, is make sure that the state's not emotionally invested, the people on the board aren't emotionally invested one way or another. They just want to see, was this violation present? Did it happen? And let's appropriately respond to that DataQ in a factual way and fair way.
We got a question here for Chris Haney. There's so owner operators leased on to larger carriers. A lot of them in Overdrive's audience, and I know I've heard over the years a fair amount about reluctance to kind of involve the back office at the carrier, in the event of an adverse inspection. And part of that has to do with some of the lease contracts out there, and there's kind of the fear that the fear that the lease contract could be terminated, depending on the violation. But so a lot of owner operators get an adverse inspection. They want to take a citation if they get one to court themselves before they attempt to involve or report that to the carrier at all. I'm just wondering, like, how Payne we're just wondering how Payne handles those situations with the owner operator's lease there. Do you encourage that kind of collaboration with the safety department? Again, having to do with that the issue of timing and sort of reducing the time that it takes to mitigate against an adverse inspection. Like, how do you guys handle? Do you guys work together a lot?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. That's a lot to unpack. I applaud the question if I understand the question.
Yeah.
But there's a couple issues right off the bat. If an owner operator or lease operator that's operating under the authority of the carrier has a violation, roadside violation or a citation, and there's hesitation on reporting that to the motor carrier, well, that's a problem right there, because there's a regulatory obligation for the lease operator, owner operator to report it. And depending on what it is, there's a time frame on how quickly they need to report that to the motor carrier.
Right.
So that right off the bat, there's a lot. Yes, there's a lot of fear right now, especially right now because of all the misclassification suits that are going on, and the states are getting really excited about an opportunity to find another source of revenue. Another story for another. But it creates an interesting point with an owner operator, because one of the things that just recently have been very clearly established, and that is the obligation for a motor carrier who has lease operators that are operating under their authority. They're operating under the safety guidelines that are set up, both best practice and from a regulatory perspective. So a carrier has not only the right, but the duty and the obligation to work with that individual to help them. And if they don't, they're foolish. And I'm speaking of the motor carrier.
Right.
Look, these nuclear awards, these lawsuits, it all stems from the driver. The driver is the first line of defense for every motor carrier. And if they try to push that driver away, or not cooperate, or not help or assist or guide them on how to deal with whatever that ticket or violation is, then that's going to be the cornerstone of everything else. It's the domino. It's the first domino that falls, and you're going to have a very hard time stopping the remainder of the flow of those dominoes. It's those the consequences. Nobody really is looking farther ahead than just the violation or the citation at the time. So the carrier has to get involved immediately, and they have to create an environment and a culture with their owner operators to know that, hey, we're available. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but by gosh, you need to tell me about the incident, because there's a regulatory obligation for you to do that. And there is a wealth of information. We've been here. Danny Payne has built this company up for 50 years. We're in our 50th year right now. There is a wealth of information available here to offer as a resource to our owner operators and our company drivers to help guide them through these situations. And I got to tell you, it's funny that case that I referred to earlier with the DataQ. I've been doing this for a long time. There's always a relationship issue. The drivers are a little skittish of the safety department, especially the director of safety, because if they're going into the director of safety's office, the thought is there's a good chance they might not come back out as an employed individual. And that's a stigma. It's something that we have to face. So it's building that relationship and getting them to understand that, look, there's a lot we can offer to help you. And I can't tell you how many owner operators that I have helped guide them through their legal issues that we have benefited from, simply from a claims perspective, whether it be a damage claim or an injury claim, that being able to get a not guilty charge on a site on a violation is paramount in the defense, the cornerstone in the defense of moving forward in these cases.
Yeah,
So,
and that's that category of DataQ challenge is the highest has the highest percentage of DataQs that result in the change. And I wanted to give you guys before we wrap things up here a little chance for any final thoughts. Chris Turner, anything come to mind?
Yeah, I would just notice that we had a tremendous amount of success from the early mid 80s through about 2009, reducing crashes and saving lives. That saves industry money. That benefits all of us. The last few years, we have seen an increase that now has remained steady. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for that. Where we talk about changes in national conversation of maybe how we view marijuana and how that results in more potentially positive tests, or whether it's speeding, especially with COVID last year, states were reporting incredible speed increases. So the point of all of this from CVSA and a law enforcement perspective that I just want to reiterate is to save lives. We're not out there looking to pick on Payne or to pick on any other driver or individual. If that's happening, that's inappropriate. And that goes back to, there are always folks that maybe shouldn't be doing what they're doing. But, our goal is to save lives. It is to do that through making sure the process is consistent, that we collect good data, and that we make sure carriers and drivers can get where they need to go efficiently, effectively, and safely as well. And to us, there's nothing more important than that. So the DataQ system is a means to an end, and that end is making sure that we have the correct data after an inspection. I'm sure Chris doesn't challenge the reason he's been so successful. When there's a legitimate violation and his driver messed up, that is a training opportunity. When a inspector incorrectly cites a violation, that shouldn't be the inspector going, getting called into his captain's office or my office when I was the captain over there and giving them the what for. It is to say, hey, we have an opportunity to make your knowledge better so that the next truck inspection you perform, that that's correct. And that's the goal. We want to make sure that data is correct and that everybody is safe.
And Chris Haney, final thoughts? Although you ended up pretty good on that last question. That was a good place.
I do. And I want to address the first part of this to Chris. I feel privileged and honored to be on this panel with you. I respect what you do in your career and all that you're offering. And there is absolutely 100% can see the sincerity that you have towards the safety of the general safety of the public and where my babies and grandbabies drive on these roadways. I applaud everything that you do, and I don't ever want to send the wrong message. With that said, there's always a but, right? With that said, I think one of the biggest, my final thought would be the future of motor carriers, drivers, our industry is in the care and custody of, this is even hard to say, law enforcement, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the CVSA, and what you do with the information that you gather. And the accuracy of that information has far more consequences than just what you see face value. I have said this time and time again publicly. I applaud the program. I believe that there is absolutely a need for oversight because of the bad actors. I absolutely believe that. It's the unintended consequences, the unforeseen consequences of the mistakes that are being made. And there's a general feeling that not enough effort into getting it right is put into it as much as collecting the data. And again, I'm going to end with, I applaud all of the effort. I just think that we can work harder.
And I think we've seen some evidence of that happening around around the country from both of you guys and a lot of the other folks we talked to in that series. It's called Setting the Record Straight, and you can find it at overdriveonline.com where you're watching this, if you're watching it there. If not, and you're at the YouTube stream, check the show notes. There's some links in there to it. But I think we're about done here. So everybody give a virtual round of applause to Chris Turner, CVSA, Chris Haney of Payne Trucking, and thanks to all of you for the questions and for moving through this today with us. Like I said, find that Setting the Record Straight series on our website, overdriveonline.com, and check for the links in the YouTube show notes. And so that's it for today. Thanks again, and everybody be safe and keep it pro out there.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.